Hello, General Hospital Spoilers will reveal. Brooklyn had never imagined that an ordinary afternoon walk near the park could alter the course of her life so profoundly. The day had begun quietly, the kind of calm moment that seemed almost rare in a city like Port Charles. She and Chase had simply been enjoying the peaceful atmosphere, unaware that within minutes they would be pulled into a moment of crisis that would reshape their future. Their attention was suddenly drawn to a young woman lying motionless on a nearby bench. At first glance, Brooklyn's heart lurched in alarm when she noticed the woman's visibly pregnant stomach. The woman was pale, trembling, and clearly in distress. Instinct took over immediately. Chase rushed forward to check for signs of consciousness, while Brooklyn knelt beside the stranger, gently calling out to her and urging her to stay awake. When the woman finally stirred, her name was revealed to be Delilah, and it quickly became clear that she was 7 months pregnant and dangerously weak. Even as Delilah struggled to regain awareness, something about her behavior unsettled both Brooklyn and Chase. Despite her condition, she insisted in an unusually firm way that the police should not be contacted. She attempted to brush off the situation as nothing more than a simple case of low blood sugar that had caused her to faint. Yet her anxious eyes and the tension written across her face suggested a deeper fear that she was trying desperately to conceal. Brooklyn could not shake the feeling that Delilah was hiding something significant, but any chance to question her further disappeared when Delilah suddenly doubled over in agony. A sharp wave of pain seemed to rip through her body, leaving her gasping for breath. In that instant, hesitation vanished. Chase and Brooklyn quickly helped Delilah to their car and rushed her to General Hospital, where the situation immediately escalated into a full emergency. Once they arrived at the hospital, the gravity of Delilah's condition became painfully clear. Medical staff quickly moved her into the emergency department, while Brooklyn followed close behind, unwilling to leave the frightened young woman alone. The sterile brightness of the hospital corridor contrasted sharply with the chaos unfolding around them. Machines were wheeled in, nurses spoke in urgent tones, and Delilah's pain intensified with every passing moment. Standing there, watching the scene unfold, Brooklyn felt something shift deep inside her. What had begun as simple compassion for a stranger gradually evolved into something far more powerful. As Delilah was rushed toward the examination room, Brooklyn caught a glimpse of the ultrasound monitor being prepared, and the reality of the unborn child suddenly became impossible to ignore. The sight stirred emotions she had tried for years to bury. Brooklyn and Chase had spent a long time confronting the painful possibility that they might never have a child of their own. It was a silent grief that had woven itself quietly into their lives, appearing in small moments and fading away just as quickly whenever they tried to focus on the future. But now, standing only a few feet away from a woman fighting to bring a child into the world, Brooklyn felt that hidden longing surge to the surface with overwhelming force. Her heart ached not only for Delilah but for the fragile life that depended entirely on the outcome of the next few hours. Inside the examination room, the tension reached an entirely new level. Britt worked quickly, her expression growing more serious as she studied the ultrasound results. The medical equipment hummed softly, while the screen revealed troubling signs that could not be ignored. Internal bleeding had begun, and the situation was deteriorating rapidly. As Britt explained that the baby might have to be delivered immediately through an emergency surgery, the air in the room seemed to grow heavier. Brooklyn felt her breath catch in her throat as the words sank in. The fragile line between life and death suddenly felt frighteningly thin. Delilah's condition was unstable, and every second mattered. For Brooklyn, the moment carried a strange and overwhelming sense of destiny. She felt as if the lives of 3 people, Delilah, the unborn child, and herself, had collided at a crossroads neither of them had anticipated. Watching the doctors prepare for the procedure, she realized how deeply she had already begun to care about the baby's survival. The realization startled her. It was as though a door in her heart had quietly opened, revealing emotions she had long believed she would never fully experience. Eventually, the medical staff escorted Brooklyn out of the room so they could prepare for the emergency surgery. The sudden separation left her standing in the hallway beside Chase, both of them surrounded by the tense silence that often accompanies moments of uncertainty in a hospital. The steady beeping of distant monitors echoed faintly through the corridor, reminding them that behind those closed doors, Delilah's life and the baby's life were hanging in the balance. Chase attempted to remain calm, offering Brooklyn reassurance, but he too could not hide the concern etched across his face. The two of them waited together in quiet anxiety, replaying the events of the afternoon over and over in their minds. Brooklyn could not stop thinking about Delilah's earlier insistence that the police should not be involved. That detail lingered in her thoughts like an unfinished puzzle. Something about the entire situation felt incomplete, as though an invisible story existed behind the surface of what they had witnessed. Yet, even as those suspicions lingered, Brooklyn found her thoughts returning again and again to the baby. She realized that the idea of the child's survival had become deeply personal to her, even though she had met Delilah only hours earlier. As time passed and the hospital staff continued their urgent work behind closed doors, Brooklyn felt a quiet transformation taking place within her. The fear she initially felt for Delilah had gradually merged with an unexpected sense of hope. In a strange and unpredictable way, the events of that afternoon had awakened something profound inside her, a renewed awareness of how fragile life could be and how unexpectedly destiny could intervene. She began to wonder whether this moment might become more than just a random act of compassion. The possibility lingered quietly in her mind, not yet fully formed, but impossible to ignore. As she stood beside Chase, watching the hallway doors that separated them from the operating room, Brooklyn felt an unfamiliar certainty begin to take shape. Whatever happened next would not simply end with the conclusion of Delilah's surgery. Somehow, in ways she could not yet explain, the life of that unborn child had already begun to change her own. As Britt and the surgical team moved swiftly into action, the atmosphere inside the emergency room shifted from urgency to controlled chaos. Medical staff began preparing Delilah for the emergency cesarean section, their voices calm but firm as they issued instructions to one another. In the middle of that flurry of activity, Brooklyn was gently but firmly guided out of the room. She found herself stepping backward into the hallway, where Chase had been anxiously waiting, the heavy doors closing between them, and the life-or-death struggle unfolding on the other side. The sudden silence of the corridor felt almost suffocating after the frantic pace inside. Through the small window in the door, Brooklyn could still see the blur of movement as doctors worked around Delilah. The machines monitoring Delilah's vital signs began producing irregular sounds that echoed down the hall, sharp electronic tones that carried a warning no one needed to explain. Each sound made Brooklyn's stomach tighten with fear. Chase placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, trying to steady her as best he could, yet his own expression betrayed the anxiety he was trying to hide. Both of them understood that what was happening inside that room was a fragile race against time. There was nothing they could do except wait, listening to the distant beeping of machines and the muffled urgency of voices behind closed doors. The waiting stretched endlessly, turning minutes into something that felt far longer. Brooklyn leaned against the wall, her mind racing with thoughts she had spent years trying to push away. The possibility that Delilah might not survive, or that the baby might never take its first breath, weighed heavily on her heart. Yet beneath the fear was another realization slowly rising to the surface, one she had tried to bury for years. Watching Delilah fight for her child had awakened something deeply personal within Brooklyn. She had spent so long convincing herself that she could accept a life without children, that she had nearly forgotten how powerful that longing truly was. But standing in that hospital hallway, surrounded by uncertainty and fragile hope, she could no longer pretend the desire was gone. She did not simply want to be a mother in theory. She wanted to nurture, protect, and guide a child through life. She wanted to give a child the warmth of a home and the security of a family that would never abandon them. The realization was so sudden and intense that it left her breathless. Chase noticed the shift in her expression, though neither of them said a word. Some truths were too heavy to speak aloud in moments like this. Eventually, the doors to the operating room opened, and the tension in the hallway seemed to pause in a single suspended moment. A doctor stepped out and confirmed that the surgery had been successful enough to save both Delilah and the baby. The wave of relief that washed over Brooklyn felt overwhelming, almost dizzying in its intensity. For a brief moment, all the fear and uncertainty dissolved into pure gratitude. A life had been saved, and another had just begun. The tiny newborn, fragile yet alive, had survived a battle that had begun even before birth. When Brooklyn was later allowed to see the baby resting in the nursery, something inside her shifted again, but this time with clarity rather than confusion. The sight of the child stirred emotions she could no longer ignore. The baby's small movements, the quiet rhythm of its breathing, and the undeniable vulnerability of new life created a powerful sense of connection. It was not a feeling she had expected, yet it felt undeniable. Chase stood beside her, silently sharing the moment, and in that quiet space between them, a thought began to form that neither had ever dared to fully consider before. However, the fragile happiness surrounding the baby's survival was soon overshadowed by a revelation that left both of them stunned. When Delilah regained enough strength to speak, her request took everyone by surprise. Despite enduring the physical and emotional ordeal of childbirth, she expressed a firm desire to give the baby away. The words seemed almost impossible for Brooklyn to comprehend. She had just witnessed Delilah fight through unimaginable pain to bring this child into the world, yet now the young mother was asking to walk away from the very life she had protected. At first, Brooklyn could only interpret the decision as something incomprehensible. But when Delilah's gaze met hers, the emotion behind it told a far more complicated story. There was sorrow there, unmistakably deep, but also a strange sense of urgency and fear. It was the look of someone who believed that letting go might be the only way to protect the child. Chase sensed the same unsettling undercurrent. Yet when both of them looked down at the tiny infant resting quietly in the hospital cradle, logic and suspicion faded into the background. What they saw was not a mystery, but a possibility. After years of carrying an unfulfilled dream of parenthood, they suddenly found themselves standing before an opportunity that life rarely offered. The decision formed slowly but steadily between them, growing stronger with each glance at the newborn child. In the end, Brooklyn and Chase chose to embrace the moment that fate had placed before them. They would adopt the baby and offer the child the home, love, and family they had longed to share for so many years. That decision brought them a kind of happiness they once believed they might never experience. For years, the dream of building a family had felt distant, almost unreachable, and suddenly it was standing right in front of them. Yet that happiness rested on a foundation filled with unanswered questions. Brooklyn could not forget the look in Delilah's eyes when she said goodbye to her baby. It was not the look of a cold or careless mother walking away without feeling. It was the look of someone carrying a heavy burden, someone who believed that letting go was the only way to protect the child she loved. There was pain in that gaze, but also determination, as if Delilah had already made peace with a sacrifice she never wanted to make. And amid the chaos in the emergency room earlier, Brooklyn had briefly noticed something strange that she had not fully processed at the time, a peculiar tattoo on Delilah's wrist. The symbol did not resemble any ordinary design or decorative mark. Instead, it looked deliberate and cryptic, almost like a secret emblem that only certain people would recognize. The more Brooklyn replayed the moment in her mind, the more unsettled she became. If Delilah was truly willing to give up her child, perhaps it was not because she lacked love, but because she believed that doing so was the only way to keep the baby safe. At that moment, Brooklyn and Chase had no idea that their decision to adopt the baby might have pulled them into a story far more dangerous than they could possibly imagine. The tattoo on Delilah's arm might not be a meaningless detail. It could be the key to a much larger secret, one that Delilah had tried desperately to hide at any cost, even if that meant walking away from her own child. And if that suspicion turned out to be true, the baby that Brooklyn and Chase had just welcomed into their lives might be more than a miracle delivered by fate. The child could also be at the center of a hidden and dangerous mystery waiting to unfold. The decision to adopt the child brought Brooklyn and Chase a kind of happiness they had once believed might forever remain beyond their reach. For years, they had quietly carried the weight of a dream that never seemed to materialize, a home filled with laughter, a small hand wrapped around theirs, the steady rhythm of family life that had always felt just slightly out of reach. Now, suddenly, that dream stood before them in the form of a fragile newborn resting in the hospital nursery. The feeling was overwhelming in the most beautiful way. Brooklyn felt a deep warmth spreading through her heart each time she looked at the baby, imagining the life that could unfold ahead of them. Chase felt it too, a quiet sense of purpose and hope that made every uncertainty seem momentarily insignificant. Yet beneath the joy lingered a subtle shadow, an uneasiness neither of them could fully ignore. Their happiness had been born out of an extraordinary situation, and with it came questions that remained unanswered. The moment that lingered most vividly in Brooklyn's mind was the instant Delilah said goodbye to her child. The young mother's expression had been filled with emotion too complicated to describe in simple terms. It was not the detached resignation of someone abandoning responsibility. Instead, it carried the unmistakable depth of a mother who loved her child enough to make an impossible sacrifice. Brooklyn could not forget the intensity of that look. Even as Delilah lay weak and pale in the hospital bed, there had been a fierce determination behind her tired eyes. It was the expression of someone who believed she was making the only decision that could protect the life she had brought into the world. That memory lingered with Brooklyn long after the adoption decision had been made. She replayed the moment repeatedly in her mind, searching for clues hidden within the emotional exchange. It was during one of those reflections that a small detail resurfaced in her thoughts, something she had noticed earlier but dismissed at the time. In the chaos of the emergency room, when Delilah had been lifted onto the hospital bed and medical staff rushed around her, Brooklyn had briefly seen a strange marking on Delilah's wrist. At the time, it had seemed insignificant compared to the urgency of the medical crisis. But now, when she pictured it clearly, the image felt unsettling. The tattoo had not looked decorative or personal in the way most tattoos did. Its design appeared deliberate, almost coded, with sharp lines forming a symbol that did not resemble anything familiar. It looked less like body art and more like a mark of belonging, the kind of symbol associated with hidden networks or secret affiliations. The more Brooklyn thought about it, the more the image troubled her. She began to wonder whether the tattoo represented something far more dangerous than she had first assumed. Delilah's refusal to involve the police suddenly seemed even more suspicious in hindsight. Her fear had not been vague or irrational. It had been specific and urgent, as if she knew that calling authorities might make an already dangerous situation even worse. Brooklyn realized that Delilah's decision to give up her child might not have come from despair alone. It might have been driven by a desperate attempt to remove the baby from a world of threats and shadows that Delilah herself could not escape. That possibility cast a new light on everything that had happened. If Delilah believed the child was safer with strangers than with her own mother, then whatever danger surrounded her life must have been severe enough to justify such a heartbreaking choice. The thought unsettled Brooklyn deeply, because it suggested that the story behind the child's birth had only begun to reveal itself.